A boy is dying in a Canton tenement, too weak to lift his arm. His mother's corpse still warm beside him, and an English professor kneels down, presses a silver bar engraved with the word treacle to the boy's bare chest, and pulls him back from the brink. The bar glows, the boy gasps, and then, months later, on a ship bound for London, the boy runs the arithmetic in his bunk. He discovers that the professor who saved him spent 2 weeks in Macau before reaching Canton. One day's journey. His mother died of cholera while that professor sipped wine in Macau drawing rooms. The professor could have saved her, chose not to, aided until every other member of his family was dead, until the boy was the last living specimen available, and then arrived just in time to collect him. The question R.F. Kuang's Babel asks isn't will the boy survive? It's what does a rescue cost when the rescuer is the one who let your mother die? That boy, renamed Robin Swift, trained in dead languages, installed in Oxford's Royal Institute of Translation, discovers that the silver bar that saved him works by trapping the meaning lost when a word crosses from one language to another. The residue of untranslatability becomes physical power, light, heat, healing, invisibility, force. And the tower called Babel hoards that power, engraves it into bars, sells it to the empire to keep the colonial machine running. The opium trade, the slave ships, the coming war against China. Every language Robin preserves, every bar he learns to engrave, feeds the machine that killed his mother. His friends, a Bengali Muslim, a Haitian exile, an English girl fighting for scraps of recognition, are being trained as tools for the same machinery. And somewhere in the shadows, Robin's half-brother Griffin, the first son Professor Lovell threw away, is running a secret society that steals silver back from the tower and redistributes it to resistance movements. He wants Robin to join. He wants Robin to burn the tower down. What opens like a story about a boy who got a second chance tightens into something much harder. A portrait of a student radicalized by his own education, a study of violence debated in library stacks and then enacted with trembling hands. A novel in which the final exam question is whether to preserve the institution that made you or destroy it, and whether you can survive the answer you give. Episode 1. El rescate del muchacho en Canton to El ritual de sangre y la primera comida en grupo. When Professor Richard Lovell pushed through the narrow alleys of Canton to the address scrawled in his diary, the boy was the only one still alive in that house. The air stank. The floor was slick. A water jug sat full and untouched beside the bed. At first, the boy had been too frightened to sit up and drink. By the time thirst gave him strength, he could no longer lift his arm. He lay next to his mother's corpse, watching flies settle on her face, too weak to wave them away. His mother had died that morning. His grandparents, a week before. His aunts, a day after them. Miss Betty, the Englishwoman, a day later. Lovell entered the room with a perfumed handkerchief pressed over his mouth. He saw the boy curled against the wall, eyes half closed. Without hesitation, he knelt beside him, pulled open his shirt, and laid a silver bar on his bare chest. Treacle, he said. The bar glowed. A shiver ran through the boy's body. He felt heat return to his limbs, the weight lift from his chest, air move through his lungs without obstruction. The sensation of endless sleep dissolved. He had come back from a brink he had already accepted. Lovell sat him up and made him drink from the jug. The boy trembled, but he swallowed until the jug was empty. When at last he could speak, he did so in English, with a barely detectable accent. "My mother," he said. "She is dead," Lovell answered, his voice level. "There is nothing more we can do for her." The boy looked toward the body. Lovell gave him no time to insist. He gathered the 4 books he found beside the Mat Gulliver, Robinson Crusoe, a Bible, and a battered copy of The Wealth of Nations, tucked them into his case, and wrapped the boy in his own coat. "Come," he said, and he took him to the English factory. Over the following days, the boy lay in a clean bed, fed broth and rice by a Scottish woman called Mrs. Piper. He slept long hours. When he woke, he stared at the ceiling and silently repeated the few English words his mother and Miss Betty had taught him. Lovell did not visit again until the boy could stand on his own and walk to the office. Professor Lovell tests Robin with a silver bar. Professor Lovell's office was a room overflowing with papers, stacked books, and sealed envelopes. The boy stepped carefully, avoiding piles that threatened to topple. Lovell sat behind a heavy desk, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight of volumes. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Were you able to read much in Canton?" Has English given you any trouble? I read some, the boy answered. We did not have many books. I reread the ones I had. Lovell nodded. He opened a copy of The Wealth of Nations and pushed it across the desk. Read, the boy read. His voice was steady, his pronunciation exact. Lovell watched him without expression. When the passage ended, he closed the book and drew a clean silver bar from his jacket pocket. Now read this. The bar looked simple, the length of a forefinger, with characters engraved on its surface. The boy took it. The characters formed a word he did not fully understand. He opened his mouth to pronounce it. The instant the syllables left his lips, the bar vibrated. A pressure closed his throat as if an invisible hand were squeezing his windpipe. He choked. The taste of dates flooded his tongue, sweet and thick. Then the taste of bile, bitter and metallic. The bar dropped from his fingers onto the desk with a sharp clatter. He gasped, coughed, clutched his chest. Lovell watched him, impassive. Interesting, he said. Very interesting. The boy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The tingling still sat on his tongue, the echo of that brief but terrifying suffocation. What was that? He asked. Silver, Lovell answered, engraved with the translation pair. Not everyone reacts like that. In fact, almost no one does. You do. He leaned back in his chair and studied the boy, the way one examines a newly acquired tool. I have a proposition. You will come to London with me. You will live in my house, receive a full education, and in exchange, you will study languages. Latin, Greek, and of course your Chinese. My Chinese, you must not lose it. It will be necessary. The boy did not fully understand, but he nodded. An orphan in Canton does not refuse an offer from an English professor who has pulled him from a cholera grave. The christening of Robin Swift. In the weeks that followed, the boy watched Lovell with a fascination that bordered on dread. The professor spoke, ate, walked, but never let an emotion surface. He was a blank page. When Lovell explained that without their meeting the boy would already be dead, he said it with the same tone one uses to recite a shopping list. The boy could not guess what this man felt. Not anger, not pity, not affection, only calculation. You will need a name, Lovell said one afternoon, a name that can be pronounced and remembered in England. Yours will not do. What name? The English reinvent their surnames constantly. Choose whichever you like, but do not take mine. I do not want you mistaken for my son. The surgical precision of that remark stung, but the boy had already learned that Lovell never apologized for his sentences. Huh! He thought for a moment. Swift, he said, for Gulliver. A laugh broke from Lovell. It was a short sound, almost a bark, completely out of step with the tone of the conversation. The boy could not read it. Was it mockery? Genuine amusement? The laugh died as quickly as it had come. Robin Swift, then, Lovell declared. Robin Swift. And so the orphan of Canton became Robin Swift, ward of Professor Richard Lovell. Not long after, they boarded a ship bound for London. At the dock, while sailors loaded the last bales, a crewman shoved a Chinese laborer down the gangplank. The man clutched a crumpled document and protested in a mix of Cantonese and Portuguese the English officers could not understand. He says he has a valid Lascar contract, Robin translated when Lovell motioned him forward. That he has already paid his passage. Tell him he cannot board, Lovell ordered. He is crawling with lice, the worker insisted, waving the document. Robin hesitated. He looked at the man, at his frayed clothes, at his desperate face. He saw in him the reflection of what he himself would have been had he not crossed paths with Lovell. But then the professor spoke again, and his voice carried an edge Robin had already learned to recognize. You are no use to them, Robin said. You cannot board. He repeated the sentence twice. The worker walked away with the crumpled paper in his fist, resigned. He had lived among Englishmen long enough to know when a refusal was final. Robin climbed the gangplank with his stomach churning. For the first time, he was not the Empire's victim. He was its tool. Robin lies at the dock and discovers Lovell's stay in Macau. During the crossing, Robin learned something that chilled his blood. Professor Lovell had spent 2 weeks in Macau before finding him in that plague-stricken house. Macau was a day's journey from Canton. One day, his mother had lain dying for a week. If Lovell had arrived earlier, if he had cut his stay in Macau short by even a few days, Robin did the arithmetic in silence, lying in his bunk through the rolling nights. Lovell could have saved not only his mother, he could have saved everyone. He did not. He stayed in Macau for 2 weeks, and when he reached Canton, only one half-dead boy remained the specimen he needed. Robin felt the cold surge of resentment rise through his chest, and he swallowed it. He did not ask. He did not confront Lovell. What choice did he have? Demand an explanation and be sent back to the streets of Canton? Give up the books, the education, the life being offered? He chose silence. And every day he did not ask. His debt to Lovell grew heavier and his silence more complicit. Suppression of the past and arrival in London. During the crossing, Robin imposed a strict discipline on himself. Speak only English. Think only English. Do not summon his mother's face, or the streets of Canton, or the grandparents dead on the mat. He buried his past under layers of Latin grammar and English vocabulary that Lovell made him study every day. By the time they sighted the British coast, Robin had almost stopped dreaming in Cantonese. He had turned himself into an acceptable version of an English boy, slant-eyed and dark-haired, but an English boy nonetheless. The first sight of London was a blow. A gray mass of rooftops and chimneys vomiting smoke, a horizon crushed under a leaden sky. The Thames, a mudflat plowed by barges, and everywhere flashes of silver. London beat to the rhythm of silver. Arrival in London and first steps toward English citizenship. Robin had never seen a city that ran on magic. The gas lamps flickered with an impossible regularity because their valves held silver bars engraved with Latin words that prevented leaks. Carriages slid along without horses, driven by bars bearing the pair Speed and Spes Hope, success which Lovell explained as they made their way to Hampstead. Silver captures what is lost in translation, Lovell said. And two words in two different languages never mean exactly the same thing. The difference is a residue. Silver absorbs it, and when you activate the pair, it releases as a physical effect. Speed, stability, healing, whatever was lost. Robin touched the carriage bar with the tips of his fingers. It was warm, vibrating, alive. The Hampstead house was a red brick building surrounded by neglected gardens. A woman with pink cheeks and a thick accent opened the door. Mrs. Piper, the same woman who had fed him broth in Canton. Lovell spoke no more than 3 words to her before vanishing into his study. The room assigned to Robin was small, furnished with a narrow bed, a desk, and a bookshelf. On the shelf, he found worn books. Swift, Defoe, a dog-eared edition of Gulliver's Travels. They were not new books bought for him. The corners were folded, the spines cracked, the margins annotated in a childish hand that was not his own. Another boy had read these books before him, in this same room, perhaps under the same professor's tutelage. Robin asked Mrs. Piper. Mrs. Piper coughed and said she knew nothing, that Professor Lovell sometimes took in students, that the books must have belonged to one of them. And she changed the subject. The following days were a whirlwind of errands. Doctor, barber, hatter, shoemaker, tailor, solicitor. Lovell marched him from place to place with the efficiency of a man completing an inventory. By the end, Robin Swift was registered as a British citizen and the legal ward of Professor Richard Lovell. Robin signs his guardianship and begins his studies. The signing took place in a dusty office before a bald solicitor who never once looked Robin in the face. Lovell handed him the pen. "This makes you my ward," he explained. "You will have a roof, food, education, and a monthly allowance. You are not my son. You will not inherit my name. But as long as you meet your obligations, I will treat you accordingly." Robin signed without fully understanding the difference between a son and a ward. He did not ask. That night, Lovell led him to the parlor and showed him an oil painting hanging above the fireplace. It showed a city of golden towers, white domes, and precisely trimmed gardens. A river wound among limestone buildings beneath a deep blue sky. "Oxford," Lovell said, and for the first time his voice carried a shade that was not clinical. "The most beautiful place in the world, the center of all knowledge. That is where you will go when you are ready." Robin stared at the painting with wide eyes. That city promised belonging, wisdom, purpose. "To enter Oxford," Lovell continued, "you will need to master Latin and Greek. We begin tomorrow." And they did 5 tutors subjected him to a regime of declensions, conjugations, and translations that left him exhausted by the end of each day. Latin stuck in his throat like a fishbone. Greek sentences seemed like impossible dances of verbs at the end and articles that refused to fit. Robin's struggle with language and politics. I do not understand, Robin confessed after a few weeks. In Chinese, the words are clean. One syllable, one concept. This is chaos. Every language has its complexity, Lovell answered. Latin expresses in one word what English requires three. Disc, learn. In Chinese, tui, shui. Do you see? Structural efficiency. Robin nodded, but his frustration did not fade. The true terror came one night when, trying to remember the word for door in Cantonese, his mind returned door. He had to dig to unearth the Chinese term. He was losing his mother tongue. He forced himself to practice Mandarin with Lovell every night, gripping the syllables like a rope over an abyss. One afternoon, while studying in his room, he heard voices in Lovell's study. Several gentlemen. Robin came down the stairs and stopped at the half-open door. He caught fragments. Canton, the Chinese will not yield. A military presence. We need the ports open. Someone mentioned his name, Lovell's Oriental boy, and another asked, where do you think his loyalties would lie? Robin pushed the door open. Silence dropped like a knife. Do you need something? Lovell asked with an uncharacteristic sharpness. No, Robin said. I heard voices. Go back to your room. The door closed. Robin climbed the stairs with his heart racing. Those men were talking about war, about China, and Lovell did not want him to know. Robin decides not to investigate his origins. The next morning, Robin found Lovell breakfasting with two of the previous night's gentlemen. One of them was called Hayward, a stout man with bushy sideburns who fixed his eyes on Robin the moment he entered the dining room. Look at his eyes, Hayward said, as if Robin were not present. Not the color, but the shape. Curious. Lovell silenced him with a glare. Hayward. But it was too late. Robin had heard enough. That afternoon he shut himself in his room and stood before the mirror. He studied his eyes. They were not black like those of the Chinese in Canton. They were a light brown, an odd color, the color of dry mud on a Hampstead path. The skin around his eyelids, the arch of his brows, all of it suggested a mixture. A white father. Who? The answer was sitting in the study downstairs, correcting translations in his neat, impersonal handwriting. Robin felt the urge to go down and ask. He did not. If Lovell confirmed it, what would change? He would not gain an inheritance or a surname or an embrace. He would only confirm that he was half English, a hybrid without a homeland, and that his guardian, his possible father, had rescued him with the same coldness one uses to acquire a rare book. He stepped away from the mirror. He never asked. Education in British culture. Mrs. Piper became his only ally inside that house. She was a practical woman who resolved the mysteries of English food with the same rigor Lovell applied to etymology. It is not a bannock, Mr. Lovell. It is a scone, she snapped one afternoon while serving tea. In Scotland they call it a bannock, Lovell replied without lifting his eyes from his papers. We are not in Scotland. Robin learned that scone was a tense word, a linguistic border between English and Scottish, civilized and barbarous. He also learned that everything in London revolved around silver. The newspapers, the pamphlets, the street corner speeches, the parliamentary debates Lovell commented on at dinner. Silver, silver, silver. Money was silver. Power was silver. The disputes over free trade, the abolition of slavery, workers' rights at bottom, they were disputes over who controlled the silver. Robin observed the social divisions with the gaze of an outsider who belongs to no class. The poor of London did not resemble the poor of Canton. They were louder, paler, more inclined to gin. The rich wore not embroidered silks but dark wool and starched collars. But the logic was the same. A few owned the silver, and those few dictated the rules. Mrs. Piper taught him to appreciate the small things. Fresh-baked bread, bitter orange marmalade, the stories she told about her childhood in the Highlands. Robin clung to those moments. They were the only times he felt, if not loved, at least visible as a person. The first beating. The pleasure of reading nearly cost him his physical safety. Robin discovered novels one afternoon when Lovell took him to a bookshop in Charing Cross. He bought him a copy of King's Own, an adventure novel the boy devoured in 2 days. For the first time, reading was not a duty. It was a refuge. He forgot a Greek lesson, forgot supper, forgot everything except the protagonist and his pirate ship. Lovell found him at 10 o'clock at night, hunched over the book by candlelight. Where were you this afternoon? Robin looked up, disoriented. What? Your Greek lesson with Mr. Chester. You did not attend. Robin went pale. He had forgotten completely. He opened his mouth to apologize. Lovell did not shout. He turned, took the poker from the fireplace, and faced Robin again with the same expressionless face as always. He struck him 12 times, no more, no less. Dry, measured blows that did not aim for the head or break bones, but raised welts and tore gasps of pain from him. Robin did not scream. He did not beg. He stayed rigid against the chair, counting the impacts, feeling his understanding of Lovell fracture with each blow. When he finished, Lovell set the poker back in its place. Tomorrow you will present yourself punctually for your lesson, and the next time you are late, the beating will be worse. He left the room. Robin remained alone, his back throbbing and his eyes dry. He did not cry, because crying meant noise, and noise could draw more punishment. But inside him, something had broken and reset in an ugly new shape. Robin's choice, submission and study. The next morning, Lovell sat him down in the study. Idleness and deceit are common traits among your race, he said, but you have an opportunity others do not. If you wish to return to Canton and live in the squalor I pulled you from, tell me now. If you wish to stay, you will work. Canton. The word hit Robin harder than the poker. Canton meant hunger, lice, stinking alleys, and the certainty of an early death. Canton meant no books, no tutors, no painting of Oxford over the mantelpiece. I want to stay, Robin said. Then work. He worked. For 6 years, Robin Swift studied like a man possessed. Latin in the morning, Greek in the afternoon, Mandarin with Lovell at night. He learned to decline, conjugate, and translate until the classical texts stopped being obstacles and became old acquaintances. Lovell never laid a hand on him again. It was not necessary. Robin had internalized the ultimatum. His value as a person depended on his academic performance, and there was no margin for error. The sudden announcement of Oxford and farewell to Mrs. Piper. The news of his admission to Oxford arrived in the most casual way possible. I have arranged your place at University College, Lovell said during dinner, without looking up from his plate. You leave in a week. Robin set down his fork. It is already arranged? Of course. Did I forget to tell you? Lovell had forgotten nothing. He simply did not consider that Robin needed to be consulted. The decision was made, like all the decisions in his life. Robin accepted it with the submission of someone who no longer expects agency over his own fate. The night before his departure, Mrs. Piper baked shortbread. She explained that short did not mean brief, but crumbly, brittle, and that the recipe came from her grandmother in the Highlands. She set a package wrapped in brown paper on the table. For the journey, she said, her voice hoarse. Robin hugged her. Mrs. Piper's eyes were red. It was the closest thing to a mother's farewell Robin had experienced since cholera took his mother in that Canton house. Arrival in Oxford and farewell to Professor Lovell. The journey to Oxford was a foretaste of what awaited him. In the coach, a female passenger examined him as one inspects exotic merchandise. Is he one of those Orientals? She asked Lovell, gesturing at Robin with her chin. Can he see properly with those eyes? Robin did not answer. Neither did Lovell. The woman shrugged and went back to talking about the weather. They reached University College at dusk. Oxford's towers cut against a violet sky, more beautiful even than in the painting in the Hampstead parlor. Robin felt his chest tighten. This was the beginning of something. At last, Lovell walked him to the entrance and handed him a key. Your room. You have a few free days before classes begin. Settle in. And do not embarrass me. Very well, Robin said, hoping for something more. Very well, Lovell repeated, not moving. Very well, Robin said a third time, to fill the silence. Lovell turned on his heel and left. No embrace, no pat on the shoulder, no good luck. Robin stood on the cobblestones with his suitcase and his package of shortbread, feeling a new and different loneliness, one no longer physical, but existential. Ride. He did not expect affection from Lovell, but something in that total absence of warmth confirmed what he had always suspected. He was an investment, not a son. The first meeting with Raimi. The loneliness lasted only a few hours. That same night, while he was unpacking, he heard footsteps in the corridor and a voice with a lilting accent. Are you the new one? The boy who leaned through his doorway was dark-skinned, dark-eyed, with a quick smile and restless hands. He wore a loose tunic under his student's gown. I am Robin, Rami's Mirza, but call me Rami. Rami was from Calcutta, the ward of Sir Horace Wilson, and, like Robin, the only student from his country in the institute. They sat on the floor of Robin's room and shared the sweets Rami had brought from India. They talked about poetry, about translations, about the lies the English told about the East. Have you read the Thousand and One Nights in Gallen's translation? Rami asked. It is garbage. He erased all the cultural references, cut out the erotic passages, turned Scheherazade into a Victorian governess. Robin laughed. It was the first time he had truly laughed since boarding the ship in Canton. And what do you do to survive here? Rami asked. I learn. I study. I try not to attract attention. I do the opposite, Rami said. My name is Mirza. Do you know what that means? Prince. The English want to believe every Hindu is either a savage or a Maharaja, so I give them the Maharaja. I dress well, I speak better than they do, and I pretend my family lost its kingdom because of the East India Company. If they are going to project stories onto me, they may as well be stories that suit me. Robin stared at him. There was something in Rami that drew him in a way he could not name. A sharp intelligence, a contained rage that surfaced in his jokes, a vulnerability disguised by sarcasm. That night, for the first time since he left Canton, Robin felt he was not alone. Freedom and the Prince strategy. The days that followed were a revelation. For the first time in his life, Robin was master of his own time and money. Lovell had assigned him a monthly allowance of 20 shillings, and he could spend it on whatever he wanted. Books, sweets, boat rides on the Cherwell. No one controlled his schedule. No one demanded immediate results. Rainey took him to the bookshops of Broad Street, the pastry shops of Cornmarket, the gardens of South Park. They shared confidences and secrets. Raimi told him how his father had taught him to hide, to lie, to transform into the image the English wanted to see. Robin told him about Lovell, the silver bar, the blows with the poker. Do you think he is your father? Raimi asked. Robin hesitated. I do not know. I do not want to know. He is your father, Raimi said. I see it in your eyes. They are not the eyes of a full Cantonese. Robin did not deny it. Raimi was the first person with whom he shared that suspicion. One afternoon, while resting in South Park after a picnic, Robin felt a sudden impulse to touch Raimi's cheek. He did not know why. It was an absurd gesture, out of place. He pulled his hand back before Raimi noticed and cursed himself in silence. A first social gathering and exclusion. Oxford's welcome was not warm. The following Saturday, Robin and Raimi joined an informal gathering in the common room with the other students from their lodgings. The Sharp twins, two blonde boys from Somerset, monopolized the conversation with increasingly uncomfortable questions. They asked Robin whether Chinese women bound their feet. They asked Raimi whether it was true that Hindus drank cow urine for religious reasons. No, Raimi answered, flat. And in England, is it true that you marry your cousins? A tense silence fell. The evening dissolved. The next morning, a note pinned to the kitchen door read, We have gone to a coffee house for breakfast. We do not think you would like it. Robin and Raimi looked at each other without speaking. That note was a border drawn in ink and contempt. They were not classmates. They were tolerated outsiders. That same week, they explored the Bodleian together, the greatest library in Oxford, and marveled at the illuminated manuscripts, the centuries-old grammars, the maps that charted an entire world reduced to ink and paper. They promised each other that this place would be theirs, that they would study harder, know more, and make themselves indispensable. Flight before the insult. But hostility did not vanish with promises of academic excellence. One night, after studying late at the Bodleian, Robin and Raimi were walking back along Broad Street when a group of drunk Balliol students blocked their path. The ringleader, a certain Mark whom Robin recognized from college dinners, pointed at Raimi with his finger. What is a Hindu doing here? He shouted. Take off that gown. You have no right to wear it. Raimi went rigid. Robin calculated the distance to the nearest alley, the number of drunk men, the odds of walking away from a fight unharmed. Raimi was proud. He would not stoop to running. Robin would. He grabbed Raimi by the arm and pulled him around the corner. They ran down Holywell Street, dodging lamp-posts and loose cobblestones, pursued by the drunks' laughter. When they stopped, gasping, Raimi would not speak to him. They walked the rest of the way in thick silence. Robin felt like a coward. Running had avoided a beating, perhaps worse, but it had also confirmed what those men believed, that a Chinese boy and a Hindu boy had no right to defend themselves in Oxford. The encounter with the silver thieves. The following night, Robin offered to retrieve a notebook Remy had left at the Bodleian. He left the library past 11 and took a shortcut through the rear cloisters. That was when he heard whispers in Chinese. 3 figures crouched behind a pillar, bent over a silver bar. One held it while the other 2 murmured fast. Broken words Robin recognized. They were trying to activate a pairing, but the bar would not respond. Ji, Robin said, stepping closer without thinking. All 3 spun around, terrified, but Robin had already seen the bar, and the bar had seen him. He reached out, touched it, and pronounced the word with the exact intonation it required. The bar vibrated. The world turned translucent. Robin felt his consciousness fuse with the silver, his body blur into the cold night air. For a few seconds, he was invisible. And then he saw the face of the stranger holding the bar. The same brows, the same nose, the same cut of hair, a face identical to his own. The twisted root, the stranger said, and then he vanished into the dark with his companions. Robin stood motionless, his hands trembling, his heart hammering against his ribs. He touched his own face with his fingers, cheekbones, nose, jaw to make sure it was still his own. The bar's echoes still hummed in his bones. The Twisted Root was a tavern on the other side of High Street. The silence of the truth. When Robin returned to his room, Remy was awake. "Did you find the notebook?" "Yes." Robin handed him the notebook and avoided his eyes. He did not mention the thieves, or the bar, or the face identical to his own. He did not know how to explain what he himself did not understand. Remy did not ask. Both of them knew the other was hiding something, and both decided not to press. It was easier to pretend. It was easier to maintain the fantasy that Oxford was just a university, that they were just students. But Robin could no longer ignore what he had discovered. A secret organization was stealing silver from Oxford. It had a meeting place, and it had a stranger with his face. And the classmates of Babel. Classes began the next morning. Robin had barely slept. The stranger's face appeared every time he closed his eyes, and the fear that the previous night's theft had triggered some alarm twisted his stomach. Remy woke him with a pounding on the door. "We are late!" They ran down High Street towards the tower that dominated Oxford's skyline like a white beacon Babel, the Royal Institute of Translation. A neoclassical mass nearly 100 meters high, with lancet windows and a coat of arms above the door that read, Dominus Illuminatio Mea. 2 girls were already waiting at the entrance. One was small, fair-skinned, her brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. The other, taller and dark-complexioned, wore her hair curly and carried an expression somewhere between bored and defiant. They were speaking to each other in rapid French that Robin could not quite catch. Letitia Price Letty and Victoire Desgraves. Letty examined Robin and Remy with open curiosity. "So, you are the foreign translators?" she asked. "The only ones," Remy answered with a forced smile. Victoire said something in French that Letty understood but did not translate. Robin caught the tone. It was not a compliment. Before the tension could escalate, a young man in a graduate's gown approached them. "I am Anthony Ribbon," he said. "Welcome to Babel. Come inside." The tour of Babel. Anthony led them through the marble foyer, under a dome that seemed to float on silver columns. The tower's interior was taller than its facade suggested. Robin felt the vertigo of entering a space that defied the laws of geometry. First floor, legal department. They translate contracts, treaties, trade agreements. Second floor, interpreters. They handle live negotiations with foreign delegations. Fourth floor, literary department. Poetry, drama, novels. "What about the third?" Victoire asked. Anthony hesitated. "Storage. And the 8th floor is the silver engraving workshop. It is at the very top because of fire risk." "Fire?" Letty asked. Anthony smiled, but he did not clarify whether he was serious. On the 4th floor, they came across a dark-skinned student bent over a Sanskrit manuscript. "Vimal Srinivasan," Anthony introduced him, "one of our best engravers." Vimal looked up and nodded, without interrupting his work. Robin took in the corridors, the spiral staircases, the offices with doors left ajar. The whole tower vibrated with a dense, almost electric energy. as if the silver stored in its walls hummed just below the threshold of hearing. Anthony takes the group to the 8th floor, and they meet Professor Playfair. The literary department, Anthony said as they climbed another staircase, is a nest of mediocrities. They spend all day arguing about meter and rhyme while we in the workshop do the real work. Robin was surprised by the harshness of the comment, but he said nothing. On the 4th floor, Anthony showed them the grammar room. Entire shelves devoted to dictionaries and grammars in dozens of languages, protected by silver bars that made them immune to fire, water, and decay. Babel held more silver than the Bank of England. Robin felt it in the gleam of the bars stacked in wooden crates, in the window frames, in the door hinges. On one shelf, Robin recognized Lovell's handwriting in the margins of a Chinese grammar. A needle of inferiority pricked him. That man knew more Chinese than he did, he who had been born speaking it. They climbed to the 8th floor. The engraving workshop was a hive of noise and silver dust. Men in leather aprons hammered bars with small mallets, engraved characters with styluses, dipped them in solutions that gave off smoke. The air tasted of metal. A middle-aged man, bald, with steel-rimmed spectacles, approached them. "Professor Playfair," he introduced himself. "Welcome to the place where the real magic happens. Anthony, are you ready for Jamaica?" "Almost," Anthony answered. "Then hurry up." Playfair led them deeper into the workshop and gestured for them to gather around a work table. The first demonstration and the blood extraction. Silver, Playfair said, lifting a clean, unengraved bar, does one extraordinary thing. It captures what is lost in translation. When we speak a word in our own language, that word carries nuances its equivalent in another language cannot reproduce. That semantic residue, that surplus of meaning, soaks into the silver. And when we activate the pairing, it is released. He engraved 2 words onto the bar with the stylus, Heimlich in German, and its supposed English equivalent. Then he set the bar on the table and pronounced the German word. The bar emitted a low hum. Suddenly, all 5 of them, Robin, Remy, Letty, Victoire, and Playfair himself, felt an enveloping sensation of refuge, of intimacy, as if an invisible bubble had sealed them off from the rest of the workshop. The noise of the hammers dulled. The silver dust stopped itching their noses. Heimlich, Playfair explained, means homelike, secret, hidden, safe. Its English translation loses several of those senses. The silver holds them and returns them as a physical effect. Robin remembered the bar on his chest in Canton. Treacle, the word that had given him back his life. Playfair deactivated the bar and asked the 4 of them to follow him into a neighboring room. There, a nurse drew a small blood sample from each of their fingers. "Now the tower knows you," Playfair said. "Your blood is registered in the shields. You will be able to come and go freely. And the tower will protect you." Robin felt a rush of pride. At last, he belonged to something. Then he remembered the story Playfair had told them before the demonstration, the one about Pharaoh Psamtik, who locked up 2 Egyptian children so they would learn the original language of humanity. The children ended up slaves to their own experiment. Robin felt a twist in his stomach. Were they the translators or the slaves? The blood ritual and the first meal together. After the extraction, the 4 students gathered in a nearby cafe. It was the first time they shared a meal without professors or tutors present. The atmosphere was tense. Letty spoke first. "Where are you both from exactly? I mean, which part of India and China?" Remy rolled his eyes. "Calcutta. And no, I do not ride an elephant or worship cows." Next question. Letty reddened but did not retreat. "I was only curious. There is no need to be rude. Rudeness is my defense mechanism," Remy replied. "It works against stupid questions." Robin intervened before the conversation derailed. "I am from Canton," he said, "and I do not ride anything either." Victoire let out a short laugh. It was the first time she had shown anything resembling warmth. "I am from Haiti," she said, "but I grew up in France, and no, I do not practice voodoo." Letty felt cornered. She took a sip of tea and gathered herself. "Do you know what I did to get into Oxford?" she asked. "Something illegal?" Remy ventured. "I sneaked into the Ashmolean dressed as a man." Robin choked on his tea. Victoire nodded, confirming the story. "Both of us disguised ourselves," Letty continued. "We wanted to see the Rembrandt collection, and women were forbidden entry. So we put on trousers, a hat, and a false mustache. We succeeded. We were inside for an hour until Victoire screamed with excitement at a painting and a guard caught us. And what happened? Robin asked. They threw us out, Victoire answered, shrugging. But we had already seen the Rembrandt. Letty laughed. Victoire, too. Remy twisted his mouth, fighting a smile. Robin burst out laughing, and suddenly all four of them were laughing together, sharing a story of transgression and humiliation that made them equals. In that moment, Robin knew that this table held the closest thing to a family he had known since Canton. He did not know the storms that were coming. He did not know the betrayals, the violence, and the deaths that would turn that friendship into a field of ruins. But for 1 hour, in a dusty Oxford cafe, Robin Swift was happy. Episode 2. El encuentro con el doble tu la lección de plata de Griffin. The double. Robin excused himself to Remy, saying he needed fresh air, but his steps didn't lead him to the college gardens or the silent cloisters of the Bodleian. They carried him straight down the high street, across the bridge, toward a tavern whose name had lodged itself in his bones, the Twisted Root. The place was narrow, the beams low, and the sweet smell of spilled beer soaked into every plank of wood. At a table at the back, beside a dead fireplace, sat the boy with his own face. The double. Close up, the differences were sharper. The stranger was older by several years, thinner, almost angular, with a jaw like a blade and a voice that sat deeper than Robin's. But the eyes, the nose, the shape of the forehead, identical. My name is Griffin Lovell, the double said, no preamble. And before you ask, yes, we share a father, Professor Richard Lovell. Robin felt the floor open under his feet. He had suspected for years that Lovell was his real father, but had never had proof. Now a stranger with his face was confirming it in a badly lit tavern. You're the younger brother, Griffin went on. The replacement. I was the first one, the one who went wrong. Griffin told him that Lovell had pulled him out of Canton years before, the same way he had taken Robin. Raised him in the same house in Hampstead, in the same room. Taught him Latin, Greek, etymology, and then, once Griffin had discovered the truth about Babel, Lovell had thrown him away. What truth? Robin asked. That Babel isn't an academic institution. It's a weapon. The British Empire doesn't trade in silver. It trades in power, and that power is extracted from the languages we speak. The colonies, India, China, Hawaii, we are the gold mine, Robin, and Lovell is the foreman. Griffin revealed that Professor Lovell had a legitimate family in Yorkshire, a wife named Johanna, 2 small children. Robin and Griffin were the bastards, the colonial sons raised to serve the empire and then discarded when they stopped being useful. I didn't let myself be discarded, Griffin said. 5 years ago, I faked my death and vanished. Now I work for an organization called Hermes. We steal silver from Babel and redistribute it to people who need it, people who don't have the luxury of being rich and British. Robin thought of the silver bar in Canton, the one that had saved his life. Treacle. If that bar had reached his mother in time, she would be alive. If there existed a network that moved silver to the dispossessed, his mother might have been saved. Why didn't you help my mother? He asked. Griffin shifted his gaze toward the empty fireplace. We don't always arrive in time. The offer from Hermes. Griffin told him to walk. They left the tavern and took a side alley, away from the gas lamps. The Oxford night was cold and wet, and the cobblestones gleamed under a veiled moon. Robin needed to understand what Hermes actually was. Griffin stayed cagey. He gave no names, no locations, no details about the structure of the organization, but he did explain the fundamental principle. Babel sells its match pairs to a very limited clientele, Griffin said. The government, the merchants, the aristocracy. Silver bars that could cure epidemics in Calcutta or prevent famines in Canton stay in London, gathering dust in the Bank of England's vaults. Hermes corrects that imbalance. We steal silver and manuscripts, send them to our associates around the world. It's not charity, it's redistribution. And what do I gain? Robin asked, though he already knew the answer. The chance not to be complicit. Griffin stopped under a stone arch and turned to face him. His face, identical and alien at the same time, held a mixture of hardness and something more exposed. Babel is financed by the slave trade, he said, by colonial wars, by the opium the British force into China at gunpoint. Every silver bar that leaves that tower is soaked in blood. You can go on being Professor Lovell's model student, the perfect translator who helps the empire expand. Or you can do something about it. Robin felt a vertigo that had nothing to do with the ale. Everything Griffin was saying matched what he himself had begun to suspect. Lovell's coldness, the professor's indifference to the suffering in the colonies, the way he and Raimi were treated as valuable but disposable resources. "How do you know I'm not a spy?" Robin asked. "That I won't turn you in to Lovell?" "Because I know our father better than you do," Griffin answered, "and I know what he did to you. I know he beat you with a poker. I know he threatened to send you back to Canton. I know he made you feel you owed him your life, when in fact he stole it." Robin didn't ask how he knew. He assumed Hermes had its own informants inside Babel. Instead, he asked the question that actually mattered. "What do I have to do?" Griffin's smile was thin and held no warmth. "For now, nothing. You have 5 days to decide. If you want in, carve a cross into the trunk of the lone birch tree against the wall at Merton College. If not, you'll never see me again. And if I say yes, then we start small, very small. A favor, a door opened at midnight. Nothing that can put you in danger." Robin laughed, without humor. "Stealing from Babel isn't exactly nothing." "No," Griffin admitted, "but it's the right thing." They parted on the bridge. Before vanishing into the fog, Griffin turned one last time. "One more thing. The room you have in Hampstead, number 7. That was my room. The books on the shelf with the bent corners and the notes in the margins. Those were my books. Lovell didn't buy you anything new. He just put you where I used to be." And then he was gone. Robin stood motionless on the bridge, watching the dark water of the Cherwell. He had just learned that he had a brother, that his father had a secret family, that Babel was a machine of colonial exploitation, and that a clandestine society existed whose purpose was to dismantle it. And he had 5 days to decide whether to join them or pretend he had heard nothing. The doubt. The following days were a torment. Robin attended his lectures with Professor Playfair, took notes on translation theory, argued with Raimi about fidelity to the original text, and all the while a part of his mind stayed elsewhere, weighing Griffin's words. Playfair was a passionate man, the kind who lit up when he spoke about his subject. His lectures were captivating. He quoted Cicero, Schleiermacher, Tytler. He explained that translation was an impossible act, a dance in chains, a constant negotiation between what is said and what is lost. Chapter: Perfect equivalents do not exist, Playfair said, moving between the desks. Every language organizes the world differently. To translate is not to find synonyms, it is to make choices. Choices that always, inevitably, betray something of the original. Robin watched him and wondered whether this man was a villain. Griffin had warned him that every professor at Babel was complicit with the Empire. But Playfair didn't seem evil. He seemed like a scholar who loved his work. Then came the lecture in which Playfair explained the ultimate purpose of translation in service to the crown. "The British Empire," he said, "is the project of uniting humanity under a single system of law, commerce, and civilization. Translation is the tool that makes that project possible. We translate to build bridges, so that peoples may understand one another, so that the light of reason may reach every corner of the globe." Robin felt a chill. Those words, spoken with such conviction, were the perfect justification for plunder. The Empire didn't conquer it illuminated. It didn't exploit it civilized. Babel wasn't a neutral academic institution. It was the propaganda department of a war machine. That same week, in Professor Kraft's class, Letty made the mistake of asking for advice on how to advance in the institution as a woman. Kraft humiliated her in public. "Miss Price," she said with a glacial smile, "you are not here to advance. You are here because your tutor paid your fees. I suggest you limit yourself to learning what we teach you and aim no higher." Letty left the lecture room with reddened eyes. Robin followed, but she waved him off with a sharp gesture. She didn't want comfort. She wanted justice, and Babel wouldn't give it to her. In Professor Chakravartis' Sanskrit class, the lesson cut even deeper. They were analyzing classical Chinese radicals when Chakravarti pointed to the character for woman and asked, "Why does this radical appear in words meaning enslavement and jealousy, but also in words for goodness and harmony?" The students sat silent. Chakravarti smiled, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Language encodes structures of power," he said. "Every word we speak carries centuries of history, of domination, of resistance. To translate is not only to transfer meaning, it is to reveal who holds power and who does not. Robin felt Chakravartis' words go straight through his chest. He remembered Griffin's voice calling him a goldmine to be exploited. He wasn't a student at Babel, he was a resource. A native speaker of Chinese in an empire that desperately needed access to Chinese to maintain its trade routes and its wars. The dinner with Lovell. That same week, Robin was invited to dine in Professor Lovell's Oxford quarters. It was the first time they had shared a meal since Robin had become a student, and the occasion carried a strangely formal air. Lovell was in good spirits. There was wine, a roast of lamb, beeswax candles. They spoke of etymology, the evolution of the Romance languages, the impossibility of reconstructing the original Adamic tongue. The myth of Babel, Lovell said, pouring himself another glass, is the founding myth of our discipline. God punished humanity by confusing its languages. Ever since, translation has been our effort to reverse that punishment, to restore universal communication. Then why don't we share that power? Robin asked. Lovell raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The silver bars, the match pairs. If we truly seek to unite humanity, why don't we distribute the silver to everyone? Why does it stay here, in England, while people die in the colonies? Lovell set his glass down on the table with a dry thud. Because the world is not ready. Silver in the wrong hands would be a disaster. Wars, chaos, destruction. We have the responsibility to administer this power with prudence. The way it was administered in Canton, Robin said, his voice steadier than had expected. My mother died because there was no silver in her house. You were in Macau. You could have arrived sooner. Lovell held his gaze. His expression was unreadable. Your mother was nobody in particular, he said. I couldn't save everyone. The sentence landed like a verdict. Nobody in particular. The woman who had raised him, who had taught him to read, who had died burning with fever while Lovell lingered in the drawing rooms of Macau. A nobody. Before Robin could answer, there was a knock at the door. A man entered whom Robin didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, with impeccable manners. Sterling Jones, he introduced himself, shaking Lovell's hand. Forgive the interruption. No interruption at all, Lovell said. Robin, you may go. It was as if Robin had ceased to exist. Sterling Jones took the chair he had just vacated, and the two men plunged into a discussion of comparative linguistics. Robin walked out of the dining room without anyone addressing a single word to him. The cross on the birch. The moment the door closed behind him, Robin stood in the corridor and couldn't move. His hands were cold, his chest felt tight, the way it used to when Lovell's silences stretched too long in the Hampstead study, except now the silence was his own, and it was filled with the echo of three words. Nobody in particular. He walked through the porter's lodge without seeing the porter, past a window lit with candlelight, someone's rooms, a face he didn't register. He went through the college gate, and the cold hit him properly for the first time, a wet February cold that seeped through his coat and into the place where the wine had been keeping him warm. He shoved his hands into his pockets. His fingers closed around the broken pen, had snapped the nib at some point during the dinner and stuffed it there without thinking. He reached Merton College faster than he meant to. The birch tree stood alone against the stone wall, its bark pale in the darkness, slick with drizzle. Robin stopped a few feet from it. He didn't take out the pen. He just stood there, the rain collecting on his shoulders, his mind playing the same few seconds over and over. Lovell's face across the table, the candles flickering because someone had opened the door, the ease with which the words had left his mouth. I couldn't save everyone. As if Robin's mother had been an item on a ledger, one line among many, rounded down to zero. Griffin's voice came back to him then, its edge of hard conviction. He made you feel you owed him your life, when in fact, he stole it. Robin pulled out the broken pen. The nib was bent at a right angle, useless for writing, but the tip was still sharp. He pressed it against the birch trunk and drew a short line downward. The bark resisted. He pressed harder, and a strip of silver white peeled away. Then he carved the crossbar, and the metal bit deep, the motion rough and fast. Halfway through the stroke, the nib snapped clean off the shaft, and Robin jammed the bare wood of the pen against the trunk and kept going until the mark was a gouge, darker and wider than the one Griffin had described. He stepped back. His breath was loud in the quiet. The rain had picked up, and the damp wool of his sleeves clung to his wrists. He looked at the cross, ugly and permanent, and felt something shift in his chest, not relief, but the exhaustion that follows a decision you can't take back. He turned and walked toward his rooms without looking behind him. The next morning, a slip of paper lay under his door, a string of Chinese characters that made no sense as written until Robin realized they weren't characters at all. A phonetic code. He replaced each romanized syllable with its English counterpart and read the message: midnight, Babel back door, hold it open 5 minutes. He burned the note in his fireplace, his hands trembling. That night it poured. Robin left his room at 11:30, crossed the drenched courtyard, and made his way to the back door of the tower. The security shields recognized his blood and disarmed with a low hum. He pushed the door open and waited, counting seconds. At midnight precisely, two hooded figures slipped out of the shadows. No words passed between them. They stepped inside, climbed the stairs, and disappeared into the dark. Robin held his breath for the exact 5 minutes Griffin had ordered. Then he shut the door and walked back to his room, soaked and terrified. He was complicit. There was no way back. The near discovery. A week later, Robin stood at the same back door, counting again. 80 seconds since the two operatives had moved past him and vanished up the stairwell. 220 remained. He pressed his back against the cold stone beside the doorframe and let his eyes adjust to the vestible's dimness. The rain was quieter here, muffled by the thick walls, but he could still feel the damp on his coat and the water dripping from his hair into his collar. He was starting to get used to the rhythm of these nights. The coded note on the windowsill, the wait for rain, the midnight door. 170 seconds. A light wavered at the far end of the corridor. A lamp. Footsteps, soft but definite, descending the stairs. Robin straightened. He didn't know whether the operatives had heard it. They were 2 floors up by now, but if whoever was coming found the door open and him standing alone beside it, he would have no explanation. None that would survive a single question. Kathy O'Neill rounded the landing and stopped when she saw him.